we're doing a lot of things right in education, but we got to blow some things up. And so school leaders have to have the courage to say, we're gonna change and we're gonna take a risk. And a lot of times people don't do that because it might be your neck, it might be your job if you take that risk. But here's something I want everybody to think about. What's the cost if we don't take those risks? Like, what is gonna happen, if we continue down the same path? And so, I just want to encourage people to have the long view, sort of playing that infinite game versus the finite, looking 300 years in the future instead of 3.
Welcome to the Passion for Learning show. We're here in Glasgow and I've come to meet Daniel Bauer, author of the Better Leaders, Better Schools book and host of the Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast. Daniel is an ex-principal who really understands how school leaders can make subtle changes that make massive difference to their children and the communities they serve. We speak about empathy, we speak about school leadership and how he transitioned from becoming a school leader to an executive leadership coach, coaching dozens of head teachers, not only in Glasgow or in the US, but across the globe. Come and join me for a really inspiring conversation and let's all learn something new. Tell us about you, your journey, how you got into school leadership, how you got into coaching executive leaders, and where you're at now.
So earlier we were talking and just sort of fell into it, right? Teachers don't necessarily think, okay, I'm gonna move into that deputy or head teacher role. And for me, I was working out with my friend Dre. And so we're at the gym, we're lifting weights. I almost killed him, like the ambulance had to come and stuff. It was bad. But he's okay though, he survived. He said something that changed everything. He said, I see the leader in you. And he just spoke the leadership into me, what he saw. And I started thinking about myself differently. And I started asking myself, what if I stepped into that role? I was going to be completely comfortable retiring as a classroom teacher. I did it very well, loved connecting with kids, building those relationships, right? But Dre saw something in me, pulled that out of me, and I started thinking myself different. So he also was, at that time, moving into his first principalship, and he said, well, I want you on the team, I need people I can trust. And so I enrolled in an admin certificate program, got my master's in school leadership, and that's all she wrote. So the next thing you know, there I am as an assistant principal.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And then what was the next step for you in terms of being an assistant principal and then getting to where you are now, which is outside of the school realm, but still within it in some ways?
Yeah, from there, moving into the principalship, and at this time, the podcast has been around for a few years. I started it while I was an assistant principal. And I don't know what it's like to lead here, but a lot of times when you're that second or third in charge, there's not a lot of professional development or leadership development, for you, and you get overlooked. Yet, I went to this conference called the Global Leadership Summit, and there was a quote that I stole. Everyone wins when a leader gets better. And I thought about it, and I'm like, how am I getting better? And if everybody wins within my community when I'm developing myself and improving my skills, there's almost like a moral imperative to invest, right? So that quote definitely rocked me. And so I started the podcast. I had 2 roads I could go down. I could feel sorry for myself that nobody was developing me, or I could take ownership over my own development. And like you, listen to a lot of podcasts, and I looked at the education space, and at the time, it was not very crowded. There weren't a lot of school leader podcasts. So I said, why not me? And if I talk to people like Jazz and other folks with tons of experience, learn from your success, from your failures, and I put that out generously as a podcast, I'll probably get better in terms of as my leadership. So I did that, moved into the principalship, the podcast grew and grew and grew, and as people start to reach out and ask for help. So that kind of became a hobby, supporting school leaders on the side, until my wife wanted to research overseas. She's a research scientist. I said, you know what, if I pursue this full time, give it 100% laser-like focus, I think I can serve school leaders and impact education in a far greater way than I am now. And give me a year runway to see if I'll be a success. She said, cool, and the rest, you know, here we are. So we're talking together now. You know, it's wild. It's wild.
What was that defining moment for you where you said, all right, Headship for me is now one chapter in my life that's closed. Yeah. I'm now moving on to the next chapter.
Just thinking about impact, you know, I think a lot of leaders wrestle with that in legacy too. And I've served in some big schools, you know, 1,500, 2,000, which is great. And to provide a world-class education for those kids, to open doors, because I tended to enjoy working in schools where kids were disenfranchised or on the margins, not seen by society or pushed down. Anyway, started thinking about that, and I have principals I serve now with maybe 300 kids, and then those that have 3,000. So let's just say like an average of 1,000 students per principal that I serve. Now there's 60 leaders in the community. I've already, you know, increased my impact exponentially from 2,000 to 60,000. And then if I think of all the podcast listeners, and there's thousands of them, I mean, the show gets downloaded quite a bit. Now I'm thinking, wow, like this is really making a difference. You're putting a dent in the universe. And so I could never go back and work full time in a school. I just love serving leaders way too much.
Yeah, that's a fantastic transition, because a lot of us, we form an identity of being a school leader or being a leader within any capacity, and that becomes our focus, our laser-like focus, and we find it quite difficult to step out of that. But I'm really interested in terms of like, what was it that made you step out of it? Was it someone from? What sort of influences did you have in order to shape that decision?
So the funny thing is that when I started the podcast, I joined a mastermind myself called Iron Sharpens Iron, and my mentor Aaron Walker, he leads that. And so when I joined, I just liked his voice. He sounded like somebody I should learn from. He's much older, you know, he's grown 3 businesses to, you know, incredible profits, sold them all for millions of dollars, and that's nice. That's indicative of some success when people trade value for the value you create. But he's been married to the same woman for 40 years, you know, he has a lot of integrity, and this is somebody I wanted to learn from. So I joined his mastermind, and I grew so fast in 6 months, personally and professionally. That's when he was really challenging me, like, what are you doing with this show? I wasn't gonna start a leadership community, and I had this epiphany. I experienced so much growth. I looked at our field, knew that headmasters, head teachers, principals are isolated. Who's serving them? And what if somebody stepped into this format? What if somebody brought us together? You know, really saw and heard and listened to what they're going through, and pushed them to be better. Yeah. So, you know, it was just that experience, and I think that gives me a bit of credibility too, is because, you know, I don't just coach people or run a mastermind. I have a coach. I have a mastermind that I'm a part of. So that's just sort of the philosophy.
And then when you stepped away from running your school as a school leader, what was the transition period like? Because obviously you've done great work in your school. How did you go about transitioning? How did you go about transitioning the next person in to be as effective as you were?
The district I was working at was very generous, and they were working around the clock behind the scenes, and so they had a person that could move within that spot, and was from within the district too, so that was a pretty seamless transition. Plus, the thing is, the APs that worked with me, they had been at the school far longer than I had, so they really ran the ship. You know, my job as a leader was to cast the vision, to empower people, to inspire, to make sure they had the resources to be effective, and they were really in the weeds, right? So they were still there, making everything move forward. They just had somebody different casting the vision.
And tell us about some of the inspiring things that you did as a school leader. You spoke about casting the vision. You spoke about preparing everything to make sure that everyone had what they needed. How did you go about that, and how can other school leaders go about doing the same?
I think it's considering just like what your role is, right? You know, I don't get drunk on the power, you know, like some people like the name that you're the principal, you're the headmaster, head teacher. My philosophy, leadership is service, right? So I'm there just to help others. I'm a guide, I'm a coach, and that's what I've always been. So I think it's partly mindset and how you approach the work. You know, that would be a tip that I would say to viewers and listeners of the show. You know, and things too is just, again, going back to really knowing your people. And so something that I used to do, it's just like a little trick. But we'd have emergency forms, right? Something terrible might happen. How do you contact the next of kin, right? Well, within that survey, I said, well, what's your favorite snack? What kind of music? What's your favorite song? And who's the artist? And I get to know people in sort of a covert way, so that then I could deliver like those snacks at just random times, right? There was Matt, who's a big burly gymnastics coach, PE coach, and huge beard, you know, like the stereotypical PE guy. And I come in and he's coaching, and I show up with some gummy worms, and he like almost cries and gives me, the biggest like bear hug, you know, crushes the wind out of me. But it's because I knew what he cared about. That's just a small little thing. Then I think about culture building as well, and it's not necessarily like resourcing, getting people what they need, but it's seeing them. And so with culture building, we were really tied into our core values, and then we created a way of celebrating others. So the community, parents, community members, staff, students could all nominate different members, from the principal to the custodian, everybody in between. And they would say, okay, Jazz demonstrates going the extra mile. Here's how I've seen him do that. And then there was a field, is there anything else for us to know? And a bunch of people would get nominated each month for staff member of the month. I paid my mom to take that data from the Excel file, create like these beautiful certificates. And the cool thing is, even if you didn't win, Jazz, but you were nominated, you got that form in your mailbox every month. And from all the people, because you were probably nominated more than once, I saw those go up in classrooms and offices and wherever. And it just, again, it's like, I see you. I understand the value you create in our organization. And when people feel connected like that, when you build those type of relationships, they'll go so much further than you might expect.
Yeah, it's like elevating that platform of success, isn't it? When you hear about the positive things that you're doing, it inspires you to keep on doing those positive things. Yeah, absolutely. And tell us more about the Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast and some of the inspiring and engaging conversations you've had on there. Like, what's been the most captivating conversation for you, or one of? I know that's probably difficult because you've had so many conversations.
There's a lot. You know, there's just over 200 officially numbered on there, and a bunch of bonuses. And I have the School Leadership Series too, which is over 200 episodes at this point as well. My favorite episode is episode 200.
Okay.
My wife interviewed me.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, there's people who I lovingly refer to as Ruckus Makers. Those are the listeners of the show. That's the tribe. And I think that's a very special show because it goes behind the scenes of Better Leaders. It kind of shows a bit of our relationship and how things are going. What she sees as the successes, how hard I work, and it's just an outside perspective. I talk about myself, I talk about the value we create with the show or the book, the mastermind, but it's from my wife's perspective. And then there's fun things too, like, you know, we talk about my quirks, like what annoys her about me, or what are weird things that I do that she thinks is funny. And you know, I have personas, I act out, I sing in the shower, I do different accents and voices, you know, and so we talk about that stuff. And that was a special show because it was different than anything we've done. But the leadership principle to that, there's two. How are you taking risks in your leadership, right? Because that's not the normal, okay, school leader thing, okay? So how are you taking risks? And how are you opening yourself up to others? You know, I'm not a stiff leader, right? Like, you've already met me before we started recording here. I'm who I am right now as I was before we turned the cameras on. and so there's that authenticity there, which is really important to me. And I want people to know me. You got to understand like where the line is, not overshare, but you don't have to play it so close to the chest. You don't have to keep it all buttoned up and too tight and rigid. Like, be yourself. Let people get to know you. And again, it's about building that culture and the relationships.
Yeah. How you spoke about authenticity, which is really, really incredible. And you have it in abundance. How do you go about sort of being very authentic with people whilst also having that clear boundary between principal and staff member or whoever it might be?
Yeah. Well, the authenticity piece, part of that is do you have routines and rituals that you regularly invest in that will help you identify like who you are at the core, right? And so each morning I do my affirmation. I talked about journaling, meditate. I created my core values. So I know that I need to show up. I need to be independent or autonomous to bring value. I need to be compassionate, serving compassionately, and I need to be confident. Like that's what it is for me. Everything else flows from that. And so do you dial in and know who you want to be at your best? And I obsess over that stuff, and I tweak it and I think about it a lot. So it all starts with yourself, and do you have those routines and rituals to help you show up at your best? The second part of the question, I think, was like, how do you transfer that, to your staff, and where do you draw the line? That could be a struggle, I think, but that's where having other thought partners or being in a community, like you wrestle with those questions, you don't have to do it alone. And so when you have, let's say, a coach, a mentor, if you have a community, drop that question there. See how people have navigated that same difficult issue. And part of it's trusting your gut, but part of it's, hearing from others' successes and failures.
Yeah, hearing from that experience is really, really vital. One of the things that's really interesting about you is you listen to and read a lot about a lot of entrepreneurs and other people outside of education. One of the things that you wrote in the book, which I found really remarkable, was stop reading education books.
Except mine, right? Like, please check out mine.
Why is that, and why is that important? Tell us, talk on that.
I don't want leaders that listen to the podcast, read the book, join the communities we have to have tunnel vision. And there's a guy that I love, Shane Parrish from Farnham Street. He's a Canadian, and he says business folks, humans, leaders, whatever, those with the fewest blind spots win. And you're going to get the education stuff. The district's going to provide professional development. You're going to hear about it. Some of it I'm talking tongue-in-cheek, like you're going to read education books. But what I'm challenging the Ruckus Maker to do is to look outside themselves, look outside the industry. And when I look at folks that have really contributed things that have made an impact around the world, so take like Steve Jobs, right? Like, he was big into calligraphy, into design. And now look at how amazing like Apple does, and the products, and how it's really the epitome of technology these days, right? But they weren't just like focused on tech, they saw themselves as so much more, right? And so I think that's at the root of what I'm trying to express there.
Yeah, so it's like school leaders looking at themselves as so much more than school leaders, and thinking outside the box, thinking outside the realm of education, in order to share inspiration from different waves of society.
And I don't remember who the thought leader was who shared this. You read so much or listen to so many podcasts, but one of the ideas I was exposed to is like, you have this, let's say, 10-year vision. Why can't you accomplish it in a year, right? What would it look like to do it in 6 months? What would it look like to do in 3 months? What would it look like to do it this week, right? So you don't hear that a lot in education, but when you get yourself around different people making an impact around the world, especially entrepreneurs, sky's the limit. Walt Disney said, if you dream it, you can do it. In 1957, Earl Nightingale wrote The Strangest Secret, and he said, we become what we think about, right? And so it's mindset, it's about dreaming big and making a plan and backwards mapping towards it.
Mm. entrepreneurship is something that is becoming much more of a common phrase, and the rise of self-employment is evident, right? How do schools go about inspiring that level of independence and also the ability to share their skills in a rounded way that enables them to take on self-employment, to take on entrepreneurship? Like, are we preparing children to be the next generation of entrepreneurs? And if so, how are we doing that?
You know, I think they need to create flat organizations. They need to try to dial back the bureaucracy. I say question everything. Question, especially tradition. A lot of times tradition, although we hold it close, it serves a student, a staff member, maybe an individual in the community that doesn't exist anymore. So why are we still doing that? Seth Godin is a mentor of mine. I was enrolled in the Alt MBA. I have the pleasure of coaching for the Alt MBA now too, and there's so much good stuff in there. But at the core of everything, it's about empathy. It's about who's it for, what's it for, and so you just got to question. And so I asked my school leaders to question a tradition within their school, blow it up, and create something new that would serve the current kids and community that they serve. And then I thought, well, how will I apply that to myself? And so Jazz, I was thinking about the school leadership series, my second podcast, and I said, well, why am I the host? I started the podcast, but does it have to be me? And if I'm a guy who really values diversity, if I'm a guy who wants to support females in leadership too, then where is that showing up in my show? So I started building a team that is diverse. And I said, here, you have the mic, your voice is important, the world needs to hear you. And so I host the show less, I amplify voices that matter in education, and that's one way I question tradition. Back to, are we preparing students for the next level? Are we preparing them for, the jobs that'll be out there, entrepreneurship? There's a lot of writing about what skills students need and the mismatch between how we're raising and training kids and the skills that employers or entrepreneurs need to be successful. Going back to the who's it for, what's it for, we're doing a lot of things right in education, but we got to blow some things up. And so school leaders have to have the courage to say, we're gonna change and we're gonna take a risk. And a lot of times people don't do that because it might be your neck, it might be your job if you take that risk. But here's something I want everybody to think about. What's the cost if we don't take those risks? Like, what is gonna happen, if we continue down the same path? And so, I just want to encourage people to have the long view, sort of playing that infinite game versus the finite, looking 300 years in the future instead of 3.
I love the way that you think about it in terms of what's the risk, and you occur to me as such a person who is skilled at taking risk. And one of the things that I'm curious about is what is the balance of how we teach children about resilience? And one of the things that you mentioned in the book actually was around children who do sports and arts tend to develop a lot more grit. Tell us a little bit more about that and your experiences of that.
Yeah, well, kids that engage in those things, they're on the stage, right? And they're in competitions, and in a very real way, people provide data and feedback that they're a success or not. So based on how they respond after a choir recital, or if you're playing football, that's what we call it here, if we're playing football.
That's the fun.
You know what I mean though? So if you're a winner or a loser, so you get that instant feedback. And are you going to get back up after you lose, or how are you going to continue to improve if you're on some type of streak? I think it starts with the teacher or the leader in the school, and they need to talk about the risks that they're taking. And again, back to the authenticity piece, are you willing to say, man, I blew this, and it's okay, here's what I learned, right? And so it's all about how you frame things. There's a story or a metaphor I like to share, and you have life, you have this event that we're having this great conversation right now, and there's two things going on. If I'm in my head too much, if I'm paying attention to the lizard brain, the imposter syndrome, Stephen Pressfield calls it the resistance, I could be like, oh man, did I say that right? Did I answer his question? I could really be amplifying the worry, the anxiety, right? All that. And then in the same coin, the other side of it is I could be completely engaged with you right now. I can try to show up, right? Independent, compassionate service, confident, provide a lot of value to you and your tribe. And the adventure is there, the optimism, the positivity, the value we create. And so I think it's talking about what you feel right now, that fear or that disappointment. I feel that too.
Yeah.
But here's what I learned, like here's why I'm excited that I failed, right? Here's how I've grown.
Yeah.
Everything has an ending, you know. You're gonna experience bad stuff, but are you gonna pick yourself back up? And we just need to talk about that more.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I often say to my son is, if you lose, you learn. And it's that confidence to be able to make mistakes and then to learn from them. And as a leader, having that authenticity to be honest and open about the mistakes that we make and then how we've learned from them, because that encourages children to do the same thing. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And what's like the biggest challenge that people in your school community, in your leadership community go through? What's the most common thing that they go through, and what's your sort of route to uncover that?
Most common challenge that they experience? So you think it's going to be something systems-wise or how to solve a certain problem, but that's not it. The biggest challenge that everybody's wrestling with is, am I enough? Am I enough?
Wow.
Am I the right person for the role? It's doubt, right? Back to the imposter syndrome. It's that confidence, right? And you know, we mentioned this before we started to record, but part of the value and the power of leading in community is not doing it in isolation.
Yeah.
You know, Greg Sacicoli wrote The Enemies of Excellence, and according to him, the number one enemy of excellence is isolation.
Right.
You don't have to do it alone. People with a lot of pride and think they're too cool for school and they've got all this, right?
Yeah.
They do it on their own, and they want everybody to know how important they are and that they can do it alone. And they're probably not doing it that great. And then there's a bunch of other people who don't know that we're out there, right? That the others are there, the ruckus makers that want to connect with them, and that you can do it within community and be a whole lot more successful.
I love what you talk about ruckus makers, because I was actually having a conversation yesterday with a coach, and one of the things that he said, and he's been a head teacher for many, many years, and one of the things he says is that the best head teachers are the ones that don't follow the rules.
Yeah.
I found that really, really interesting. I was like, wow.
I love it.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting intersection of school leadership, society, and how we shape and mold things going forward.
Well, back to who I am at my best, I said independent and autonomous.
Yeah.
If I am trying to lead or thrive within an organization that tells me, you know, here's where you need to end up and this is how you get there, I'm gonna freak out, right? I'm gonna perform poorly. I'll probably get myself fired, right? Because I can't exist in that. And thinking about the younger generations too, or who are coming up, I think more people are like that. What we need, again, is that empathy, that listening. I think people need to define the boundaries and then say, go play. And it's okay if you screw things up.
Yeah.
You know, I have people on my team behind the scenes that get the podcast out, you know, folks that are coming on board that are going to coach new cohorts that I'm not leading in the mastermind, variety of folks. And what I continue to tell them is like, why you keep coming back to me, you know, core values, honey badger spirit. I want you to be independent. I want you to be successful. You know, I picked honey badgers because, you know, they had the meme in that video. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's ridiculous, but they're an animal that could actually use tools, right, to figure stuff out. I tell them, I want you to be independent. And I guarantee, even if you screw something up, you're not going to break better leaders, better schools. Maybe we'll have to apologize for something, you know, or apologize, you know, to a client we serve or whatever, like, but we'll survive. So go figure it out, like, you know, do it. And, yeah, just give them the space to grow.
I love that, because it's like it's the antithesis of what is needed and what is required in the modern economy today.
Yeah.
A lot of, like, historically, it was kind of like you had a boss and you had to follow certain rules, and those were the rules, and you just sort of played within the lanes, right? Whereas now, leaders need a lot more creativity. They need a lot more independence, as you say. You know, you need people that come up with solutions and not problems. So it's really inspiring to hear you talk about that and how you're shaping that within your own workforce, and your own team. Yeah.
And let's connect the dots. I mean, bring that back to how are we preparing kids for the future, right? And the tasks that we're asking them to do, is it pretty linear and very logical in terms of what the next step is and what the right answer is? Or are we giving them really interesting problems to solve that, who knows? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm just asking the question.
Right.
And I want to see what you come up with. And that's the beauty of it, right? That's what we need.
Yeah. You mentioned in the book some of the things that school leaders can do to make their schools exciting places to be. Yeah. I would love to hear you speak on that and just mention a few of the top tips that people might do to make their schools exciting, inspirational places to be, and the kind of place that school leaders, teachers, and the whole community walks in and says, I love being.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, there's a guy, James Altucher, which I think I might have talked about in the book, and he has this practice of writing 10 ideas a day, right?
I love that.
And again, this is sort of an entrepreneurial skill as well, but it's like you come up with a lot of bad ideas before you hit a good one. And so to make school an exciting place, come up with as many bad ideas as you can, you know? I have a friend, Jesse Cole, who runs a baseball team in America called the Savannah Bananas. And when somebody on his team says that's a terrible idea, and he goes, how can we make it worse? You know? Because we might just find something special doing that. And so for me, you know, I talk about why not create like a musical or a play where everybody within the building has a part, and then you perform it. I think that'd be pretty neat. I don't know schools that are doing that. And then do a new one the next year, right? Like, do stuff like that. I talk about when people are taking themselves too seriously, just have a whole bunch of pies, you know, lying around and smash them in the face. Like, that's stupid. But if you're a part of a culture where somebody is having a bad day, they're acting like a jerk, they have this negative energy, and you had the permission to take a pie and slam it in their face, like, I think I would like to work there, right? It's just like dreaming big, dreaming kind of silly, and that's at the root of it. I don't know that I have the answer, but it's just like that's the process of getting there.
Yeah, and it's about, you know, creating those ideas and really brainstorming, really going to work on that and being wholeheartedly creative with it, I think is what you're saying. Yeah. And what really powerful.
And what I want to challenge everybody that's, you know, watching this show, they're going to hear that, like with the pie, okay, and maybe the school performance too, and they say we can never do that. Why not? Like, seriously, why not? And so, yeah, that's the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the best way that school leaders can go about being more productive within their day? One of the things that I really resonated with in the book was where you said email can hijack your schedule faster than you read this sentence, right? And like even as a leader myself, you know, I've seen it, like, you know, email just like ping, 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 and it's a constant reactive mindset. What are some of the top things that school leaders can do to really heighten their productivity?
Turn off all your notifications. Turn off all your notifications, that red bubble that pops up. So, you know, they design these things to hijack our brains, to have us addicted to go back. I'm not going to riff too long on that. So just turn off your notifications. Don't answer your email, like, as frequently. And so I used to be in the habit where you're just walking through the hall, you're checking email. I sit at my desk, pull up the email. Same thing with Twitter, LinkedIn, you know, Facebook, all those kind of things. What would it look like if you intentionally scheduled that time to check email, social media, or whatever on your calendar, and then have the discipline to do it only at those times? Oh, I'm so important. I'm the headmaster. People need me. No, they'll figure it out. And what I found too is when emergencies, right? Oh, the fires I need to put out. You know. If you give it some space and time, the fire burns itself out, what you'll find. And if it's really, really important, then people should maybe have your cell so they could text you, or a lot of, you know, principals, they'll have a radio, that kind of thing. They can find you. People know where you're at. So I highly doubt that the world's going to end because you didn't answer some type of problem on email. I'm all about ideal week. So you heard me scheduling, like, where do you and when do you check email? Another issue that leaders often face is, I wish I could do this, right? But I never have enough time. It's because you don't schedule it, right? And so there's difference between tasks that bring incredible value to your work, deep tasks, and then shallow tasks. And there's a metaphor that I'm going to steal from Shane Parrish. I mentioned him from Farnham Street. He talks about poker. I don't know if you play, but when you get dealt in, right, you have to match the blind, right? You have to put in a few chips. That doesn't mean you win. That just means you get to continue playing the game. And then you have to play with strategy, you know, and with wit and savvy to win. And so that's the difference between deep work and shallow tasks. Email is not going to help you win in leadership or life. It's going to help you keep your job. But schedule some time to do deep work. I suggest 90 minutes to 3 hours if you could swing it once a week. I'm most productive in the morning. So a deep work session might be from like 8 to 11, right? And then I'd work on things that I dream big about, or sometimes I just dream during that time to come up with the big ideas. Then I get to the other things that need to happen to keep better leaders afloat, or when I was in the school, to keep the school moving forward. But the time is there, you just need to be intentional with it. And it's an interesting thing happens when you put constraints and boundaries within your tasks. So I'll give you a current example. As an Alt MBA coach, there were 20 students that I served. And there's prompts, and the coaches give responses to push the students in their thinking. Well, I was spending so much time, like hours on it.
Sorry, by MBA you mean?
Like a Master's Business Administration. But this is a program that Seth Godin created, and it's called the Alt MBA. So you don't get a certificate, but you definitely become a better leader, a better business person, a better marketer. And so anyways, you have prompts. They're really brilliant. You get feedback from the coaches and your peers, and I was spending too much time, and I was a first-time coach. So I practiced what I preached. I put boundaries around it, and I only allowed myself 7 minutes per student. And I was able to cut the time that I spent probably by like 70%, but still deliver the same amount of value, right? And then it forced me too to be very precise. So instead of giving Jazz 10 comments to think about, what's the one comment that Jazz needs to hear right now? So, you know, leaders watching the show, think about that. How do you put constraints around the tasks you do? And then how do you prioritize and have that precision of what's at the core? And deliver on that and ignore the rest.
Fantastic, absolutely. I mean, that resonates with me completely, right? It's like having certain times to check your email, having social media, all that sort of stuff, scheduling those times that is like low productivity work or like low intense focus work is really, really powerful. And then on the opposite side is having your deep work times, as Cal Newport talks about.
Cal Newport. So
that's
there
a
you go.
really interesting book for sure.
It's great. We read that in the Mastermind. That's a good one.
So tell us about the book, Daniel, and where can people get it? Where can people find out about it?
Available on Amazon. So, you know, thank God that's over here in the UK too. But just type in Better Leaders, Better Schools Roadmap, and that's the best place to get it. I will say I just released the audio version too, which has a ton of extra content. So that's a steal. So if you get the book, cool. But if you get the audio, you're going to get a whole bunch more, content in there. And the interesting approach with the book, a lot of people are surprised by it. You know, it's called the Better Leaders, Better Schools Roadmap, small ideas that lead to big impact. The first two-thirds of the book are all about you, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. So I talk a lot about self-leadership and looking inward. And then the last third of the book are some practical things that you could do within the school.
Give us one thing that schools can do, that school leaders can do to look within themselves and to look after themselves in terms of their health, well-being, because we often talk about it for teachers and we more so talk about it for students, but we very rarely talk about it for leaders.
It's back to the intentionality and just schedule the time. So I saw a meme. I just gave a talk in Atlanta, Georgia about balance and all this. And I saw this meme where there's this lady and she goes, I have a gym membership, but I didn't go this morning. I went to McDonald's instead, but the cashier's name was Jim, so it's the same thing, right? No, it's not. And you know, I'm sick of hearing busyness is a badge of honor. That doesn't make you cool, right? If you tell me you have a gym membership, but you're too busy to go, that tells me you have a lack of priorities, right? My biggest pet peeve, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get so much more gray hair. If I hear another school leader that says, I can't eat lunch, right? Or my lunch is always cold. Why? You're an adult.
Yeah.
Go to lunch, eat. How are you effective?
Yeah.
How are you able to serve if you're hangry, right? Like, that's not gonna happen. So I always ate, you know, I never had a problem eating. And so it's back to intentionality. You know, identify who you are at your best. Think about what routines and rituals will help you show up like that, right? And then put it on the calendar. Again, doing leadership or life in a community that can encourage you, hold you accountable. Say, Jazz, I know that you want to run this 5K race. How's the training going? You know, if I'm checking in on you, you're probably a lot more likely that you're going to be practicing and have a successful race. So stop doing it alone, be intentional, put it on the calendar.
Yeah. And you speak about this community. Tell us about how people can join the community. First of all, how they can find out more about you and how they can become a part of that leadership community.
Thank you. Yeah. The website's betterleadersbetterschools.com, so that's pretty easy. If you add a /mastermind, you can learn all about the leadership community that I facilitate. On social media everywhere, I'm Alien Earbud, which doesn't make sense. My name's Daniel Bauer.
Yeah.
I was a reading teacher, writing teacher. And there's a word game called an anagram where you take letters and you mix them around and spell new words.
Yeah.
If you take my name and you rearrange the letters, you get Alien Earbud. That's one of the iterations. I just thought that it looked funny, right? Like an alien with earbuds in, and so that's where you could find me on social media. But betterleadersbetterschools.com, very active on social media, and would love to connect.
Yeah, fantastic, amazing. And my final question is, you've worked in a lot of countries.
Yeah.
You've served schools in a lot of countries. If you were to become like the global minister of education, if that were ever a position, what would be the one thing that you would change in education?
One thing. So I'm gonna have to practice what I preach and really prioritize. I would design some sort of course on empathy.
Wow.
What do you believe that I don't believe? And why are you right? I highly suggest that people go to counselors or therapists, you know, that kind of thing, even if life is good. Because, or joining the mastermind, you know, that's not therapy, but whenever you can get people to show you things that you don't see and be objective, that's a superpower.
Yeah.
And when I was going to therapy, I can't believe this was an epiphany, but I was talking to Joe, and we were talking about some issue, and I'm like, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
He goes, well, everybody doesn't see it that way. What? Like, seriously? Like, this thing that's very clearly, there's a right and a wrong, it's black and white. There's people that would disagree with that.
Yeah.
That was like an epiphany for me. And so I would design some course on empathy, because one of the reasons I think, you know, we go into politics on this. I mean, we could talk about communities, but talk about schools. The challenges we face is because of lack of empathy. We're not changing because we don't understand who we serve. If you know who you serve, you're going to be a success.
Yeah. Mr. Daniel Bauer, it's been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure was mine.
Meeting you and also speaking to you on the show. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having me out.
And yeah, definitely I hope that many people reach out to you and find out more about the fabulous work that you're doing, because it is fabulous.
That'd be great. Thank you. Appreciate it.